Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important topics. Let's cover these articles as comprehensively as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement for 2026 and even 2027 aspirants. Those of you who are preparing to give the upcoming prelims exam, you would require as much practice as possible. You're always advised to take up as many full length mock tests. So, Unacademy is providing one such opportunity for all of you, the All India Prelims Test Series. Now, this test series program is available usually only to our paid students. It's a program which is priced at 4,999. Now, just for 4 days to help all the students, we are bringing down the price of the prelims test series to just 1 rupee. So, this will give you an opportunity to attempt up to 30 full length and sectional mock tests, including the CSAT paper as well. You will get an all India ranking. You can gauge your performance, and accordingly, you can come up with strategies that you can use in the actual prelims exam. So, those of you who are interested to enroll in the prelims test series at just 1 rupee, please go to the description box below, click on the link, and this will be available only for 4 days. Only from 1st May to 4th of May, you can avail this opportunity. With this, let's get started and look at the first topic. On page number 10, there's an article that focuses on labor rights. As today is the 1st of May, and across the world, it is marked as the International Workers' Day or Labor Day. It happens to be a public holiday in most countries, and there is a great history attached behind the marking of the Labor Day. So, on this occasion, the writer is exploring the concerns of the working class in India. The article helps you understand the plight of the working class and why India requires further labor reforms in order to secure minimum wages, in order to ensure labor safety and their occupational safety. What changes are required? That is something we can try to dissect through this article. So, first, let's understand why International Workers' Day is marked on this day, on the 1st of May. See, there are different versions of the International Workers' Day which is celebrated. Many countries mark it on the 1st of May. Some countries mark it on the first Monday of the month of May. And countries like US, Canada, they celebrate it in September as well. So, this goes back to the labor rights movement that kicked off in Europe in late 19th century. Because see, during the Industrial Revolution in the early part of 19th century, the working class was exploited and abused by the bourgeois, by the capitalist class, who would make the workers slog out in the factories for hours together for bare minimal pay. And there would be no focus on worker safety and social security and their well being. So, in late 1880s, in 1889, in Paris, the International Workers' Congress was held that established the Second International for Labor Parties. It brought all the Marxist, left, and socialist parties together to focus on labor issues and the plight of the working class. The main demand was to restrict the working hours to 8 hours per day. Because from Britain to France, there were many factories where workers were being pushed to slog for 10 to 12 hours for bare minimum pay. So, this movement was rooted in securing that much needed relief for the workers to strike a sort of a work life balance and ensure that work hours are limited to 8 hours through a legislative restriction. Parallelly, in the United States, a similar movement had broken out. Some of you might have heard of the Haymarket affair in Chicago, where factory workers were protesting and demanding for 8-hour workday with better wages and better occupational safety. But This particular protest was met with brutal police force, and it quickly turned into large scale violence where many workers were beaten and injured. So, since then, in the US as well, the day is used to mark the struggle of the labor class and the working class. So, this day is even marked through the United Nations, through the International Labour Organization, and it's an occasion to talk about labor issues, labor welfare, and labor safety. So, in this context, let's see what is the plight of India's working class. Recently, in some of the recent sessions in the last month itself, we have discussed this particular topic at least 2 to 3 times. We spoke about the protests of factory workers in Noida, where they were demanding an increase in minimum wages because in the neighboring state of Haryana, the Haryana government had increased the minimum wages by nearly 35%, bringing the monthly minimum wage from around 11,000 rupees to close to 15,000 rupees. So, on a per day basis, a worker in Haryana was earning up to like 585 rupees per day, whereas a worker doing the same work in Noida would get roughly around 435 rupees per day. So, for you, this may not seem like much. It might seem like a very minute difference. But trust me, for the working class, this is about survival. This is how they can afford the basic necessities of life, from food to rent to the school fees of their children. So every rupee, every 100 rupees matters for the working class. So the workers in UP, particularly in Noida, they started massive protests, and the administration met the protesters with force, carrying out lathi charge. And eventually, after the pressure built up, the UP government has announced an interim hike in minimum wages up to around 20-21%. And it has even constituted a committee to look into the demands of the workers. But workers are demanding a minimum wage of at least 20,000 rupees per month. Right now, they barely earn around 11,000 rupees per month. And the government has promised that they can start earning up to 13 to 16,000 rupees, depending on the skill set they have. But workers are demanding that minimum wages must be set at least 20,000 rupees per month. So this highlights the issue of minimum wages. And it's not just about wages. There are other concerns that affect the labor community and the working class. The biggest concern is about the safety, especially in hazardous industries where hazardous work is involved, dangerous equipment is being handled. The lack of safety measures and the poor regulation and the poor enforcement of the inspections by the government, and how factory owners cut corners on safety in order to reduce their expenses. This directly results in risking the life of our workers. And every month, we have some or the other incident in the country where Indian workers are getting killed. So, one such tragic incident occurred recently in Chhattisgarh at a thermal power plant owned by Vedanta Group, where a boiler, an industrial boiler, which was not properly maintained. The forensic studies have shown that the fuel loading capacity was overwhelmed because the upkeep of the boiler was not done by the contractor who was working for Vedanta Group. So, this negligence on the part of Vedanta Group and the contractor led to a deadly explosion where 20 innocent workers were killed and many more were injured. Now, this has become the lived reality of workers in the country. This keeps occurring every now and then. Last year, if you remember, in Telangana, up to 45 workers were killed in a similar industrial accident. From Tamil Nadu to Uttar Pradesh, from Andhra Pradesh to Maharashtra, these incidents keep recurring, from boiler explosions to industrial fire or a gas leak. And the working class ends up paying the price. So the laborers are not only taking a hit with regard to the income they are earning, they're also paying a price with their lives. And this is something which is inexcusable in today's world. See, to reform the labor market and to secure labor rights and labor welfare, the government of India has recently brought out a set of labor codes. In 2020, four labor codes were enacted by the Indian Parliament. The Modi government labeled them as a transformative measure to protect and uphold labor rights and to promote labor welfare in the country. But some of the provisions have been very controversial. They have been strongly opposed by trade unions and labor unions. And finally, after a lot of to and fro, the rules have been notified last year, and these labor codes took effect from November 2025. This includes the Code on Wages, that deals with minimum wages, the Industrial Relations Code, that places few regulatory standards on the industries, the Social Security Code, dealing with the social security and welfare, including insurance, pensions, etc., for the working class, and finally, the OSHWC, the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code, to ensure safe working environment and to protect workers at hazardous workplaces. Now, these four laws, they have replaced numerous central legislations that were outdated. Around 39 central legislations, 29 plus another 10 old laws and codes, they've all been subsumed under these new four labor codes that have been brought out. But however, what is important is that the working class is deeply unhappy with the provisions of the labor codes. So let's dissect some of the problematic provisions where objections have come in. Because, see, there is a sense amongst the working class that the government doesn't care much about the rights of the workers. There is also a sense amongst the working class that the government is always in collusion with the industry owners. In fact, the Indian Labour Conference, which is a critical platform, it's a tripartite platform where government, the employer, and the employees can come together to discuss labor issues. This important conference has not been held for more than 1 decade. The last time the Indian Labour Conference was convened was in 2015. So it's almost been 11 years. And this critical tripartite platform has never convened after that. This was one platform where the working class could raise its concerns against the employers with the government to get them resolved. Now, when you go into the details of the labor codes, if you look at the layoff conditions, on what grounds companies or factories can lay off the employees. Previously, there was a very strict threshold. Because, see, during the 1960s and 70s, when trade unions were very active, many factories, they ended up laying off employees in mass numbers, especially when the business would take a hit, when the economy would see a downturn. Close to 500,000 Indian workers were laid off by several Indian factories, which led to the rise of the labor movement in India and even turned into violent strikes and protests. So, this friction between workers and industry owners has always been present, not just in India, but across the world. So, during the emergency era, from 1975-76 to 1982, several rules and regulations were brought in order to protect laborers from being abused and exploited by the employers. So one such restriction that was introduced in 1980s was that any industry or factory, if they had to lay off people, they had to take prior approval of the government. If a factory was closing down and if it had 100 workers, or if a factory was laying off some of its employees, right? This was the threshold. And they had to approach the government, secure the prior approval, so that government could maintain administrative scrutiny whether the layoffs were justified. Of course, you can't expect the employers to keep paying salaries if the business is going down, right? Private enterprise is always about the profit motive. The business model should make sense. So, of course, industry owners, they need the prerogative to lay off employees, to downsize whenever it is necessary, whenever it's a business requirement. But if they are doing it randomly just to increase their profits, that is where the state needs to intervene to protect the rights of the workers. So this clause had been introduced. Now, under the Industrial Relations Code, the threshold is being increased to 300 workers. Now look at India's MSME sector. A large number of industries and factories, they operate in the small to micro segment, right? And they all employ hardly 100 to 200 workers, and many of them have less than 50 workers. So none of these factories or industries will get covered. They need not take any prior government permission before they lay off their employees or shut down the factory itself. They can do it without any notice. And this leaves the workers at the plight and the mercy of the employers. Then if you look at occupational safety in India, previously the occupational safety standards applied for factories which had 10 workers with power and 20 workers without power. Now the government has doubled the limit. It has increased this to 20 workers in factories with power and 40 workers without power. So all the micro small enterprises which have just around 10 or 15 employees, they are outside of this bracket, meaning they will not follow the safety norms and standards. The Telangana accident, which I was mentioning last year, where 40 close to workers were killed, it was found in the investigation that the basic heat sensors and heat alarms, which should have been there in a hazardous industry, were never installed by the factory owner. This was held as one of the primary reasons as to why there was no alert and how the workers got trapped. And now we have these new regulations that is lowering the threshold, essentially diluting the provisions, making it easy for industry establishments to bypass the safety norms and standards. And who will pay the price? The working class, and they will pay a price with their lives if accidents takes place. So when you look at the provision for inspections, see, industrial inspections have been quite notorious since our socialist era, right? The strict government regulations and licensing processes had led to the Inspector Raj, License Raj era, where government inspectors had basically become rent seekers, meaning they were basically taking bribe from the factories to look the other way when violations were found. So it became a big impediment for India's industrial growth, where these government officers would misuse the discretion they had and created a corrupt nexus, increased the red tapeism. And this is what constrained India's economic rise for many years and decades. But at the same time, it's equally important to maintain timely surprise inspections, unannounced inspections, so that government authorities can keep a check on the factories to see whether they're following the safety norms and standards. In fact, there is an international obligation as well. Under the ILO, the International Labour Organization, we have Convention number 81. Please make a note of this, very important for your prelims. ILO Convention 81 specifically deals with labor inspection. The ILO, which is part of the UN system, has recommended that unannounced inspections, basically surprise inspections, have to be mandatory in any country. And this is an obligation on the members of ILO, and India is a responsible member. But if you look at the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, India is deviating from ILO Convention 81. Because in the name of harmonizing inspections and making it easier, in order to ensure inspectors are facilitators and catalysts for the industry, it has introduced a system where through the Shram Suvidha portal, factory units will be randomly chosen by the computer systems for inspections. And the inspector will list the inspection date on a website, meaning the factory owners know on which date an inspection will happen, at what time the inspection will happen, which means they will cover up everything, cover up all the lapses, since they have prior notice. And also the new law provides for self-certification. While this is seen as a measure to promote ease of doing business, to make it more investor friendly, business friendly, and curb the Inspector Raj nexus, and to prevent the possibility of bribes and corruption. The problem is when you're giving prior notice, when the factories know when the inspection is going to happen, they will obviously cover up the lapses. And this goes against ILO Convention number 81, which mandates that inspections have to be done unannounced. There has to be surprise inspections on factories to see whether they're following the norms or not. Then if you look at the right to strike, the right to shut down factories, stop working, lot of strict restrictions have been brought in through the new rules, and it almost makes it impossible for workers to strike going forward. See, this again is a controversial subject. Because back in 1960s to 80s period, when labor unions became very strong, this itself became a huge political issue. Labor politics would become a big hurdle for business in the country, because every other day the labor union leaders, trade union leaders, would order the shutdown of factories. They would lead mass strikes, shutting down work for days together, weeks together. That would result in significant business loss. Many factories even shut down because of frequent strikes that destroyed the business itself. This itself had become a sort of an extortion kind of a thing, where the leaders of labor union would extract money from the business owners to keep the factory functional, right? So this was a notorious era. But at the same time, you need to understand that the working class has only one leverage. The only leverage is to protest, to strike, because they have no other leverage against the employers. While the capitalist class can use the money to gain influence, the working class has nothing apart from the labor they are offering to sell, right? They work for money. And stopping work, withholding work, is one of the bargaining chips that laborers have. So, internationally, right to strike is often seen as necessary to protect labor rights. But at the same time, it can disrupt businesses. So, that's why you need a fine balance where you need to cut out unnecessary politically motivated strikes. But protecting the bargaining power of the laborers is important. Yes, shutting down businesses makes no sense, right? And especially if you're looking to become an industrial economy, you can't have workers shutting down factories every other week. Of course, that can't be allowed or tolerated, but you need a proper dispute resolution or conciliation process, maybe through tribunals, where laborers and working class can get their grievances redressed. Because what else will workers do if the employers are not listening to their grievances? So, for that, you need a conciliation process. You need tribunals which can hear those grievances and complaints and settle those issues and disputes. But since they don't function well in India, the one chip that workers have is the right to strike. But the new laws, they completely take away this right. It completely prohibits any form of collective action. Even forming a union within a factory or a industry is looked down upon, and the factory owners will not tolerate that. And they have to give 60-day prior notice before a strike. 60-day, that is 2 months of prior notice, which is again impractical. And any mass leave applied by employees, if more than 50% of employees take mass leave, that is constituted as a strike. And the employer can even fire those workers, get them removed, can even initiate legal action against them. So such strict conditions have been brought in, which virtually makes strikes impossible going forward. See, as I said, strike is not the right way for settling the disputes between working class and the employers, because it harms the business sentiment. It will destroy the business culture. It will bring down the business model itself, right? It becomes a biggest hurdle for your industrial growth. At the same time, you can't abandon the working class. They need their bargaining power to be protected. If not strike, the other option is to have proper dispute resolution platforms, conciliation platforms, where the issues can be settled, where workers can raise their grievances, and the state has to be the intervening factor, the mediator between the employers and the working class. Now, this is being completely abandoned, and essentially, the working class would largely be on their own. Though there is a conciliation process under the code and the tribunal process, it is very complicated, and workers may not even be aware of the mechanisms. So, this takes away the bargaining power of the labor class. Now, look at India's laws related to factories and industries. They are all outdated. It's not just the labor related laws. Look at the Factories Act. It's from 1948. It predates many of the states of India. Look at the Workmen Compensation Act. It is of a colonial era, even before the constitution was made, even before India became independent. And we still have these laws in effect. So, in today's world, how can these outdated laws cover the concerns and the grievances of the working class? These were laws designed in a completely different era for a different economy. That economy was built on jute mills, cotton textile mills, railway factories. But look at today's economy. You have digital technology, which has made a radical revolutionary change. You have gig and platform workers. And in most factories, workers are on contract. So these outdated colonial laws does not take the economic and technological changes into account. So that is why the writer strongly believes that India requires major labor and industrial reforms. Though new labor codes have been brought in, they have few problematic provisions where some of the safety and guardrails have been diluted, which favors the industry against the working class. That is why many trade unions, labor unions, they have been protesting against the new set of labor codes. So, based on what we have discussed, please take up this mains practice question and try to practice your answer writing. Now, let's move to the next topic, a very, very important topic under international relations. See, in a few weeks, the United Nations is all set to elect and appoint the next Secretary General. So, this is an opportunity for us to understand the role of the UN Secretary General, the functions carried out by the UN Secretary General. It will help you understand the significance and the importance of this office, the UN Secretary General's office. So, we will talk about the election process, how the Secretary General is appointed, what are the criteria and requirements, and the functions and the significance of this position. Now, when you look at United Nations, right, it sits at the very apex, at the very top of international rules-based order system, the system that was created after Second World War. Now, within the UN, there are principal organs or what we call as primary organs. You have the UN General Assembly that provides universal representation to all the 193 UN member states. Then we have the UN Security Council, an elite club of 15 nations, where the 5 permanent members wield the veto, which makes the UNSC the most powerful body. It primarily deals with all the critical subjects of the UN, from international peace and security to imposing economic sanctions or authorizing the use of force or controlling UN peacekeeping missions and UN peacekeeping forces or dealing with counterterrorism or nuclear disarmament. All these critical powers are with the UNSC, primarily with the 5 permanent members who wield the veto. The P5 includes US, UK, France, Russia, and China. Then, of course, you have 10 non permanent members as well who are elected on a rotational basis for a 2-year term. And these non permanent members, they are elected on the basis of a geographical quota. There is a geographical distribution of seats for different regions and continents. And accordingly, the 10 non permanent members are chosen for a 2-year rotational term. Apart from UNG and UNSC, we have the International Court of Justice, which acts as the judicial organ of the UN, headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. Then we have the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, that mainly looks at the welfare initiatives of the United Nations, be it the Sustainable Development Goal Initiative or Agenda 2030, or climate change related action, including the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or disaster management, or any global health issues. So all these welfare related subjects are dealt with by the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council. Then we have the Trusteeship Council, which is no longer operational. It was meant to administer the trusteeship territories that were left behind post Second World War. And these trust territories were governed and administered by the UN for many years. They were prepared for self-rule, self-independence essentially. Many of them became independent nations. Some of them merged with other neighboring countries. So now there are no trusteeship territories. So trusteeship council doesn't function anymore. Now the final organ, the primary organ of UN is the UN Secretariat. What is the UN Secretariat? It is the executive arm of the UN, the executive organ of the UN. So the functioning of UN General Assembly, UN Security Council, Economic Social Council, ICJ, it is all dependent on the administrative work, the bureaucratic work, and the diplomatic work, which is carried out by the UN Secretariat. In a way, it is similar to the Cabinet Secretariat of India. Like how the Cabinet Secretariat is one of the highest offices in the country that coordinates all executive and administrative functioning. It will assist the Council of Ministers and the Union Cabinet. It will coordinate with all the ministries and different organs of the government. It will coordinate with state governments. So that executive role is performed by Cabinet Secretariat at the apex level in India. A similar executive role is performed by the UN Secretariat. It will basically set the agenda for UN General Assembly. It will conduct the proceedings of the UNGA. It will move the files for UNSC. The decisions taken and the resolutions adopted by them will be enforced and implemented by UN Secretariat. Global coordination between UN members is achieved through the UN Secretariat. So in a way, the UN Secretariat is the face of the United Nations. And it is the Secretary General who heads this primary organ. The UN Secretary General is basically the head of the UN Secretariat, the chief administrator of the UN, also called as the chief diplomat of the UN. The UN Secretary General occupies this critical office, giving leadership to the executive arm of the United Nations. So, let's say there is a global crisis, a new war has broken out, or a pandemic has broken out, or there is a massive disaster in some part of the world. The entire assistance that comes from the UN is coordinated and implemented through the UN Secretariat. So, this executive arm of the UN is run under the leadership of the Secretary General. Hence, the Secretary General is also known as the Chief Administrator and Chief Diplomat of the United Nations. So, the Secretary General expresses his or her views about global issues. He will nudge all the global powers to work in coordination, and he basically represents the conscience of the United Nations on global matters, on global issues. So right now, Antonio Guterres, who is from Europe, who was previously with NATO, with European Union, former leader of Portugal, is heading this critical organ. So his term is coming to an end, and the race has begun to select and appoint the next UN Secretary General. Now let's understand what is the process of this selection and appointment. See, this is defined under the UN Charter, which is the constitution of the UN. According to the UN Charter, the UN Secretary General is elected by the UN Security Council. But you all know what this election means. All the 15 members of UNSC will not play an equal role. It's primarily the P5 countries which will get to decide as to who will be the next Secretary General. Why? Because they have the veto. The P5 countries, Russia, China, US, UK, and France, they will essentially recommend a name to the UN General Assembly. They'll have to come to a consensus and they'll recommend a name to the UNGA, which is going to appoint that individual as the UN Secretary General. So UNGA is like a rubber stamp, in a way like the President of India, how the President acts on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, right? A nominal authority of sorts. So UNGA doesn't really have the appointment power. It only completes the formal process. But the actual selection happens at UN Security Council, primarily decided amongst the P5 countries. Clear? But however, once the name is recommended to the UNGA, there is a voting which takes place. It requires a simple majority vote to confirm the appointment of the Secretary General. So these numbers would anyways be worked out by the P5 countries, but usually it is the United States which has the highest pull to get its candidate appointed to the UN Secretariat. if you look at the history of UN, almost all the secretary generals, they've always had the blessings of United States. They might be from other countries, because see, there is a geographical representation here as well. The office of secretary general can be occupied by individuals from different regions on a rotational basis. So it's divided between Africa, Asia, Western Europe. So right now, the current Secretary General Antonio Guterres is from West Europe. Then there is a quota for East Europe and a quota for Latin America and the Caribbean. So these are the 5 geographical regions. I hope this is clear to everyone. So right now, it is the turn of the Latin American Caribbean region to get their candidate elected. So they will push a candidate from their respective regions, from different countries. So for example, there is a candidate from Chile. There are candidates from the Caribbean, right? And their names will be considered by the UN Security Council. And once the P5 countries come to a conclusion, they will recommend that name to the General Assembly. And General Assembly will have to vote upon it, and a simple majority vote will confirm the appointment. But according to precedents, it is primarily the United States which exercises the maximum influence in the appointment of the UN Secretary General. Now, can you find out, has an Indian citizen or Indian national ever been elected as the UN Secretary General? Let me know in the comments. Please read about it. Check if ever an Indian has been elected as the UN Secretary General or not. Clear? Next, what about the term? The Secretary General is elected for a term of 5 years. Clear? But the UN Charter doesn't really say anything about reappointment. So reappointment is possible. But since 1981, there is a practice which has been adopted, like a convention, that maximum number of terms for a Secretary General would be 2 terms. Like if you take Antonio Guterres, for example, he has completed 2 terms. That's why he has to step down and a new Secretary General has to be chosen right now. So though UN Charter doesn't place any term restrictions, from 1981, there is a convention of sorts, a voluntary practice amongst the member states of UN, that the term of Secretary General will be limited to a maximum of 2 terms. And each term is 5 years long. Now, as I said, the role of the Secretary General is indeed very crucial. See, many of you might think the UN is a toothless organization. It's a useless body. It can't really bring peace in the world. It can't settle wars and disputes and conflicts. While that is true to some extent, because the UN is as effective as coordination that exists at these platforms, right? It's largely dependent on the P5, which exercise all the supreme powers. That's why countries like India and others are pushing for reforms of the United Nations. But despite the flaws and weakness of the UN, trust me, the UN system is the only system that we have to maintain international rules-based order. Because without that, there won't be any semblance of order. And today we have leaders like Trump, Xi Jinping, and others who are blatantly dismantling the rules-based order. Right? This includes Netanyahu, Putin, and many other world leaders and countries which are completely disregarding international rules. So at such a critical time, you do require an institution like the UN. It may not be perfect, it may not be the most effective, it might be useless as well in some situations, but still, it is the only platform for countries like India to engage in multilateral efforts. It's the only platform where middle powers, developing, underdeveloped countries of global south can raise their voice and ensure that their voice is heard. So that's the reason why the United Nations remains critical and the UN Secretariat remains a key body, a key organ of the United Nations. The UN Secretariat did play a very important role. For example, during COVID-19 pandemic, during some of the recent disasters, and the concern they expressed during wars and conflicts or during terror attacks, it holds a lot of global significance. During Pahalgam attack, the UN expressed concern for India, sympathy for India. It has expressed concern about the Gaza war, about the Iran war, about the Ukraine war, right? And it can exert some level of influence and pressure on these countries and push them towards talks. More importantly, the UN manages peacekeeping missions. It has deployed thousands of peacekeepers across the world in conflict zones. And today, this institution is struggling because, see, the UN depends entirely on funding provided by the member states. This is technically called mandatory assessment or mandatory assessed contribution. Every member state has to provide this mandatory prescribed contribution so that the UN can use the funds for its functioning. But today, with countries like US quitting various UN bodies and not making timely payments, many other countries are also following the same. They're not making the contributions on time. And today, the UN is facing a deep financial crunch. So, without funds, how will the UN function? How will it run its welfare programs under Sustainable Development Goal Initiative? How will it focus on climate action, climate change initiatives? How will it focus on disaster risk reduction initiatives? So that's why the Office of the Secretary General and the UN Secretariat is extremely critical. It can still guide the world, it can still push the countries together and achieve some sort of coordination between them to deal with the pressing global challenges of today. Clear? So this can come as a mains question. So this process of electing and appointing the new Secretary General will take almost a few months. It will be done by September, October period. And from next year, from January 1st, 2027, we will have a new UN Secretary General. So because of this development, there can be a possible mains question on this topic. So please take up the question for your answer writing practice. Now let's move to the next article. Let's look at this editorial on page number 10 that deals with forest fires. See, forest fires are not only a natural disaster, but man-made factors have aggravated the hazard risk. Man-made factors, that is anthropogenic factors. It has aggravated the risk of forest fires, and we are seeing more frequent, more intense forest fires or wildfires as it is called across the world. From the deadly bushfires in Australia, which wiped out lakhs of hectares of forest land with many species and ecosystems, to the deadly wildfires in California or Canada or in Europe, across the world, even in temperate zones, even in areas known for colder temperatures, we are witnessing deadly wildfires and forest fires. Look at how the Amazonian forest cover has been decimated, especially in Brazil. And it's not just natural factors like uh, heat wave or drought and climate change. You have anthropogenic factors involved here where man-made contribution is adding to this problem. Rapid deforestation, industrial development, urbanization, and human negligence, right? Where a carelessly lit cigarette or a match is disposed in a careless manner, in a negligent manner, which can easily trigger a deadly wildfire that can spread across a very vast area. Look at the devastation that happened in Los Angeles and across the west coast of US just recently, right? So wildfires are emerging as a major environmental risk, as one of the serious disasters that is taking over the world, especially during the summer months, during the hotter seasons. And of course, climate change is adding to it. Higher global temperature, more heat waves, recurring droughts, the changing weather patterns, right? The changing oceanic currents and the changing jet streams, the changing nature of the weather patterns itself is having a deadly impact. And this all contributes to increased incidents of wildfires or forest fires. So India also witnesses many, many such events during the summer months. Right now, the whole country is in the grip of a deadly heat wave with temperatures hitting alarming levels. Right? There are multiple heat wave alerts across the country from northern India to central to southern parts of India. So this article is mainly focused on the Nilgiri belt and the deadly wildfires which have been spreading over the last few days. See, the Nilgiris is one of the most critical habitats in our country. It's part of a crucial biodiversity hotspot, which is the Western Ghats. And it sits at the crossroads of the Western and Eastern Ghats. It's one of the most crucial protected area in our country. The Nilgiris is a biosphere reserve, right? Also designated under the UNESCO Managed Biosphere Reserve Program. It's part of the UNESCO's MAB program, Man and Biosphere Program. So this massive protected area is spread across 3 states in southern India, in the Western Ghats belt. It stretches from southern part of Karnataka towards Kerala and Tamil Nadu. It includes several protected areas inside it. It has the Bandipur National Park Tiger Reserve, the Nagarhole National Park Tiger Reserve. You have Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, Mudumalai National Park and Tiger Reserve in Tamil Nadu. So this is one of the most critical habitats where multiple sanctuaries, tiger reserves, and national parks are contained within the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. But the Nilgiri mountains, they are quite regularly affected by wildfires during the summer months. And this time, the incidents being recorded are quite deadly, quite dangerous. The fires have spread so rapidly that it has spread towards the Coimbatore Erode belt, towards the Kerala border as well. Places like Mudumulai, Masingudi, which are known for their rich wildlife and biodiversity, have been severely affected. Plus, the region is home to a lot of indigenous communities, tribal, local communities. So these communities are being affected. And the situation has reached such a level that local administration and forest officials are not able to contain the fires, and they have requested the Indian Air Force for assistance. See, first of all, in the Nilgiri belt, accessing the steep slopes is very difficult. Right here, the Western Ghats rises considerably in height, and the road connectivity and infrastructure is not that good. So, accessing these steep, slopy areas to put out the fire is a Herculean task. Though local officials often take precautionary measures before the summer month starts, usually forest department works with environmental groups and volunteers and local communities to clear all the biomass and organic matter, the dry leaves especially, which can easily catch fire. They even create these fire lines where they clear an entire patch, segregating the forest area into different segments so that fire in one segment doesn't easily spread to another sector of the forest. So such fire lines are drawn. Sometimes even trenches are dug. If possible, water is also filled to act as a fire break, to break the fire from spreading into the further sectors of the forest. So manual clearing of the dry biomass is also taken up. When dry organic matter is available, that's when fire will catch easily. So in the spring season, right before summer sets in, this is an exercise which is carried out by forest departments in coordination with the local communities. They will work with volunteers to collect the dry biomass and the organic matter. They clear up the material which can easily catch fire and create these fire lines or fire breaks so that the fire doesn't spread. But despite all the precautionary measures, the fires are increasing in the Nilgiris. Now, the same situation can be seen towards Northeast India as well, towards the Himalayan belt as well. From Uttarakhand to Nagaland to Manipur, multiple fires get reported and the scale and intensity is increasing. So, this is nothing short of a disaster. It affects the ecosystems, it contributes to more emissions, it impacts the local population. There can be loss of human lives, public infrastructure, private property could get destroyed. It could affect connectivity, it can affect economic activities. So these incidents will have a deadly impact. And with climate variability becoming a new reality, climate keeps varying and changing. I'm sure many of you must have experienced. If you compare summers of your childhood to today, there is a vast, considerable difference, a noticeable difference in just 15, 20 years. So climate variability is adding to the uncertainty. So without adequate planning and without the right measures to contain wildfires, India is staring at a serious problem in the coming years. So what measures can be taken up from a disaster management perspective, from an environmental perspective? What specific measures can be implemented to tackle wildfires? See, first of all, you have to improve your early warning systems. You need early warning and forecasting. This is the first step in disaster risk reduction and disaster preparedness. And also, parallelly, you have to understand the hazard and vulnerability profile of the country. So, through scientific assessments using satellite imagery, drone imagery, you need to scientifically determine the specific locations, not just the states and districts, but at the grassroots level, you have to identify which specific forest area or which specific hill is more prone and vulnerable to wildfires. You need to create a heat map and match it with the predictions that will be provided by the IMD, India Meteorological Department, that provides for early warning forecasting for temperature, for heat wave alerts. So, with this information, the administration and policymakers can better tackle these incidents. The district administration, the forest department, right? They need this valuable data. One is hazard mapping, vulnerability identification, which the NDMA has already done. National Disaster Management Authority has worked with concerned stakeholders, including Forest Survey of India, to clearly identify which specific forest areas are more prone and vulnerable. But we need more micro level data. Right now, the data is of a higher resolution, meaning it's at the state and district level. You need to zero it down, narrow it down to a micro level where specific local action can be initiated. And with accurate early warning forecasting alerts about rising temperature and heat waves, subsequent action can be initiated. So, preventive measures can become more effective. Preventive measures like creating fire breaks, by creating these fire lines, or clearing of all the biomass, the dry biomass which would have accumulated, clearing of that biomass is critical. Then protecting the water sources within these areas is also equally important. They act as a natural buffer. The rivers, lakes, ponds located within the forest areas, when you conserve and protect them, they'll act as a natural barrier, and they'll also ensure sufficient water is available to the animals, to the wildlife, because wildlife faces the biggest threat. And you also need long term measures. You need to check industrial expansion, urbanization. You have to spread better awareness amongst local communities. Local communities are very critical in the fight against wildfires. Their role is absolutely critical. You need to create better awareness, not just amongst the locals, but even amongst the tourists. Because in many cases, fires are a result of human negligence. A bonfire which was not extinguished, or in areas like Nilgiris, you have tribal communities, indigenous communities, which use fire for their indigenous activities. Like when they collect local forest produce, they often put out these fires. But if it's not properly extinguished or the fire material is left behind, that becomes a risk factor, right? And they also set fire to the grasslands, right? That is one way of clearing the area to grow fresh produce. And curbing those practices, encouraging alternatives, safer alternatives, is very crucial. So, this basic awareness with proper enforcement, if those who are responsible for leaving behind negligent fires without extinguishing it properly, right, they should be held accountable and penalized for it. So, you need strong legal measures, you need better awareness, and along with that, you need better firefighting measures. Be it the use of the Bambi bucket, where helicopters can carry these huge Bambi buckets, pick up water and drop at the area where fire has broken out. And there are fire retardants, which are also sprayed to further curb the spread of the fire. But of late, the bigger concern is the embers which start flying because of strong winds. See, this is what happened in Hawaii, in Los Angeles. The fire became deadly and uncontrollable because the strong wind will carry the embers, right? The red, burning hot material, it starts flying in small sizes through the wind, and it will spread very quickly, and it can basically, spread out the fire into a very large area. So, dealing with them requires thorough planning, requires the use of satellites and drones. And that is exactly what India needs to work upon. Even now, we rely on European Sentinel satellites for tracking the wildfires. ISRO has the capabilities. We do have Earth observation satellites, remote sensing satellites, which can help in these efforts. But the scale has to be promoted, right? So this will require great coordination between central government, state government, and even the civil society. Coming to the next topic, Iran has issued a message to the United States. Iran has said that it will not give up its nuclear capabilities, missile capabilities at any cost. Iran has hardened its position, and Iran has also stated that it will not give up the control over Persian Gulf and Hormuz Strait. Now, this position of Iran creates fresh tensions with the United States because the US is pressing for a deal on its terms. Though the war has slowed down and stopped for now, at least by and large, the United States still maintains a very large military presence, and Trump has said if Iran doesn't agree to a deal, that war might resume at any moment. But it is also a fact that US appetite for the conflict has reduced because of the cost asymmetry involved, because of the depletion of US military arsenal as well. The US is holding back on further military efforts, but it again exposes the futility of this war that was waged by the US. On the other hand, Iran realizes it has a unique advantage, a leverage in the form of Hormuz. It is hardening its position, it's committing that it will not give up its nuclear missile capabilities. It will not subject itself to surrender in front of the US. And in return, the US is threatening to extend the blockade to cripple the Iranian economy. The US Navy has levied effective blockade at Hormuz and blocking Iranian ports and Iranian vessels from going out. Because Iran, if it can't sell the oil, its revenue will dry up. So this would only lead to further escalation of tensions. But what is quite ironic and interesting is that Trump says that the blockade is more effective than war. Trump has said that the blockade of Iran has been much more effective than the actual war. If that was the case, then what was the need to go and bomb the country and destroy the entire region, killing many innocent civilians? And also, the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, in a congressional hearing, he again claimed that US had obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities last year during the 12-day war. Trump also has said this many times publicly. So if indeed those claims are true, if US had indeed obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities last year itself, then what was the justification for the war this year? Right? So Trump administration is going in rounds, going in circles, contradicting themselves. Every day there is a new story, a new development, and Iran keeps hardening its position. So it is essentially like a stalemate, like a proper strategic stalemate, where neither side is willing to back down. And both sides have some leverage or the other, and they're trying to drag the negotiations out. So that is the current status with regard to the Iran conflict. Next, on the front page, there's an article related to the monthly report, the monthly review, the monthly economic review, which is published by the Department of Economic Affairs from the Ministry of Finance. So please make a note, can be important for prelims as well. Within the Finance Ministry, the Department of Economic Affairs publishes a monthly economic review, which gives a overview or a picture of the state of the Indian economy. So according to the monthly economic review, the Department of Economic Affairs has raised concern about the rising revenue deficit of several state governments. Almost 9 states are staring at very high levels of revenue deficit, which could bring them under greater fiscal stress. Because see, right now the global economy is under strain because of the Iran war and the supply chain disruptions. So as the Indian economy takes the hit in the coming months, because this war will have a lasting effect, even if tomorrow a peace deal is achieved, the war will leave behind a lasting effect for several months. And as the Indian economy gets hurt, the state governments will feel the heat probably in another few quarters. And those states which are running high revenue deficits, they will be under greater pressure. They will be under more fiscal stress, according to the report. So, what do you mean by revenue deficit? Revenue deficit is essentially the difference between revenue expenditure and revenue receipts. So, under revenue expenditure, you have recurring expenses of the state government. You have recurring expenses under expenditure, such as salaries, pensions, subsidies, or interest payment, right? These are the basic expenses on the revenue side for a state government. Clear? I'll again repeat if you want. Under revenue expenditure, states spend on recurring expenses, repetitive expenses like salaries, pensions, subsidies, interest payment, etc. Because they would have borrowed heavily the debt. They have to service the debt by paying the interest on that. So all those regular recurring monthly payments fall under the revenue expenditure bracket. Revenue receipts are the funds, revenue raised by the government through taxes, through various fees that might be levied. Now, when there is an imbalance between expenditure and the receipts, it will obviously lead to a deficit. If the deficit is sustainable, manageable, it is fine. But once it becomes unsustainable, that gets very dangerous, because then the state governments either will have to approach the central government asking for funds, or they'll have to take more debt, start borrowing from the markets, again with approval of the central government. So this will only create a vicious loop, where they will get trapped in the loop of taking loans to match the deficit, and the interest payments will go up, and this affects the overall fiscal situation of the state government. The state finances will take a hit. So the ability of the government to spend on welfare will be directly compromised. So that is the warning provided by the finance ministry in this report. Now, please make a note of the states that are reporting high levels of revenue deficit: Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Haryana, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Punjab, and Himachal Pradesh. And the highest is reported by these three: Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, and the state of Kerala. Coming to the next topic, it's about Kerala again. So, the Kerala Forest Department and the State Biodiversity Board have launched an initiative to conserve and protect the sacred groves in the state of Kerala. So we will understand what are sacred groves. It's a very important topic for prelims and mains. But first, note down the names, the locations of 5 sacred groves in Kerala which are chosen for this conservation project. Now, can you also read about the State Biodiversity Board and its composition? That's a small homework for you. I want you to read about state biodiversity boards and who heads the State Biodiversity Board. Please let me know in the comments below. Now, the decision has been taken that 5 sacred groves in Kerala will be better restored and conserved and protected. This includes the Ezikara Sacred Grove in Ernakulam, Pattancherry in Palakkad, Villapalli in Kozhikode, Iriti in Kannur, Uduma in Kasargod. Now, what exactly are sacred groves? See, sacred groves, they carry a lot of religious, cultural, spiritual, and ecological significance. These are essentially community owned forests, owned by indigenous communities, tribal communities, or local communities. And you see such sacred forests being present across India, from Northeast India to Kerala to Karnataka to Rajasthan. And they're all known by different names. For example, in Karnataka, the sacred groves are referred to as Devara Kadu, literally the forest of the god. In Kerala, it's called Kavu. In Andhra Pradesh, it's referred to as Pavitra Kshetralu, a sacred place. In Rajasthan, it's called Dev Banis. In Himachal and Uttarakhand, it's called Dev Van, again, forest of the god, right? Similarly, across northeast and central eastern India, there are such sacred forest lands that exist. So, in these community owned lands, community forests, there could be these temples that are worshipped by the local population. Usually, it would be a Hindu deity, but in some tribal indigenous cultures, it could be other indigenous faiths. So, they treat the entire place to be sacred and of great religious and spiritual significance. They not only worship the deity and the temple, but they worship the entire forest around it. In fact, local regulations would also be there at the community level, which will prohibit hunting and logging. They can't cut down the trees, they can't hunt the animals or wildlife found in the community forests. So the community takes up the ownership of protecting this sacred forest land. And this has been a master stroke in conservation. It's an indigenous method, a age-old ancient method of conserving and protecting forests and wildlife. This is even recognized by the IUCN. In fact, sacred groves have legal protection under the Wildlife Protection Act. They are recognized as community reserves. And what is interesting is that these sacred groves are also a source of sustenance for local communities. Because usually in sacred groves, medicinal plants are cultivated, which has a commercial value. And these local communities, they will only harvest minor forest produce in a sustainable manner without damaging the forest. Since they revere the forest, they'll not hunt or they'll not cut down the trees, but they will cultivate medicinal plants. They'll harvest minor forest produce like honey, berries, tendu leaves, etc., from which the local communities will sustain their livelihood. So, this is a key part of environment conservation. You find such sacred groves even across the world wherever indigenous communities are found. So, conserving and protecting them is essential to protect our biodiversity and ecosystems. Next, Mizoram has officially become free from insurgency of all kinds. See, when you look at Northeast insurgency, Mizoram was one of the first states in the Northeast region which successfully dealt with the problem of insurgency back in 1980s itself. The Mizo insurgency led by the Mizo National Front under its legendary leader Pu Laldenga, who later even became the chief minister of Mizoram. This insurgent movement started in 1960s and lasted all the way until 1980s. Finally, through a mix of security operations and through better development and through peace talks, India signed the Mizo Peace Accord in 1986 that led to the surrender of the MNF. The Mizo National Front and its armed wing, the Mizo National Army, made up of the Mizos, they surrendered, laid down their arms, and ended the Mizo insurgency in 1986. See, the main demand of the Mizos was that they were mistreated by the Assamese when Mizo was just a district of the larger state of Assam, especially when there was a famine in late 1950s. It was alleged that the government of Assam had neglected the Mizo people. And they also resented the government of India. They felt the merger with India was a forceful merger and the Indian state never cared about the indigenous people. That was a root cause. But eventually, India tackled the threat, and through a peace process, we signed the Mizo Peace Accord in 1986, and Mizoram was separately carved out. Initially carved out as a union territory and then given complete statehood. And thus, Mizoram became a very peaceful state with regard to insurgency. But however, there were other branches of insurgency, not by the Mizos themselves, but there were other groups and factions that continued to operate in Mizoram. So one insurgency is related to the Hamar people. They are an ethnic scheduled tribe found in northeast India, primarily in Mizoram. You find them in Manipur, Nagaland, and Assam and Tripura as well. They belong to the larger Mizo tribe. They speak the Hamar language. So, from many decades, the Hamar people have a demand. They wanted constitutional autonomy. They wanted autonomous district council to be set up in the Hamar region of Mizoram under the sixth schedule provisions of the Indian constitution. They wanted a constitutional autonomy to be provided. So, there was an armed insurgent group led by some of the Hamar leaders called the Hamar People's Convention Democratic, the HPCD. This group continued to remain active. It would engage in sporadic violence once in a while, and it had more or less become a criminal organization more than an insurgent group. It was resorting to extortion and local criminal activities, and its demand had eventually died down. Now, the government has struck a deal with the HPC. the state government of Mizoram has negotiated a surrender deal with the Hummer People's Convention Democratic Front. Its leader and the cadres have agreed to lay down their arms, and this brings all insurgencies in Mizoram to an end. So, this makes Mizoram an insurgency free state, and that is a big development with regard to India's internal security. Coming to the prelim section, we have three important articles. Let's take a quick look. On page 12, there's an article detailing the Komagata Maru incident and the significance of this incident for Indian history. So this topic is in news because popular singer Diljit Dosanjh, he recently came on a very popular show in the United States on the Tonight Show hosted by Jimmy Fallon. I'm sure many of you must have seen the clips already. So there he spoke about the Komagata Maru incident, right, as he is about to perform in Vancouver in Canada. And the concert venue is just 2 kilometers away from the dock where the Komagata Maru ship was docked. So this goes back to India's freedom struggle, the colonial rule. See, the state of Punjab was always crucial for the British. During World War I, the British had heavily recruited from the Punjab youth for British Indian Army. And they had even given a lot of loans to promote agriculture. But this also pushed farmers in Punjab into debt burden, and many farming families, they collapsed. They could not repay the heavy debts, and thus migration became very attractive for the Punjabi population, moving to the Western countries, primarily United Kingdom, United States, later Canada. And many Punjabis had even moved towards Southeast Asia as well, settling in Singapore, even Hong Kong. Some of them settled in Japan. So very quickly, the Punjabi community had spread out under British rule. But in 1914, there was this tragic incident which is deeply connected with our freedom movement and the Gadarite movement. A number of Punjabi migrants who wanted to seek better opportunities in Canada, they tried boarding the Komagata Maru ship, a vessel belonging to a Japanese firm, right? The name itself is a Japanese name. So it carried a number of Indians on board, around 376 passengers, with 340 Punjabi Sikhs, a few Hindus and Muslims as well. The British authorities, they never treated the Indian subjects as equals compared to, let's say, the subjects of their other colonies. Right? This was always very evident, though they claimed that under British rule, everyone would be given equal treatment. Right? At least that is what they would try to project. But it was very evident that subjects of the colonies would always be treated as lower class citizens. So this vessel carrying these Indian migrants reached Japan, from where it set sail to Vancouver. Now, in Canada, there was a very controversial law, the single entry or the single migration law, also called the continuous journey law. Under this law, you would be allowed entry into Canada only if you carried out a continuous journey from the source to destination, and you should have boarded the vessel at the country of your birth. Let's say a British national boards a ship in UK and directly goes to Canada. So they will be allowed entry. It was designed primarily to benefit the white races, because they knew the people of other colonies like India and others, they would not be able to make a continuous single journey. They would have to rely on other ports and countries to make this long circuitous journey. Now, this was seen as a discriminatory law. And though some of the Sikh community members had migrated to Canada, they even protested against the law. They raised their voice against it. But eventually, when the vessel arrived, when Komagata Maru arrived in Vancouver, the authorities refused to grant them permission to enter the country. Immigration authorities blocked their entry. So this led to a standoff, right? The police tried to breach the standoff, led to violence as well. Eventually, the ship was turned back, and the ship tried docking in Hong Kong and Singapore, and everywhere the British authorities kept denying the docking permission. Finally, the ship had to come back to Calcutta, and here, when the British authorities tried to force them onto a train to send them back to Punjab, it resulted in a face-off that turned violent, where the British opened fire, killing several of these innocent people. So this tragic, horrific incident, right, is linked to the Gadarite movement because the vessel itself was hired by a well-known Gadar activist, Gurjeet Singh from Punjab. Gurdeep had already emigrated to Singapore, set up a successful business there. So he had hired the ship as a form of resistance against the British movement. And especially in the US, in the west coast of US, where a Punjabi community had settled, they had already started planning the Gadarite struggle to wage a war against British India, to try and topple the British regime in India. So British intelligence was closely monitoring the developments. They were watching the efforts to organize this vessel and send Punjabi migrants abroad. So there were active efforts by colonial authorities to send back these passengers and treat them inhumanly. They were even denied food and water. The conditions on the ship was horrific for months together. So this tragic incident went on to reshape India's freedom struggle. The Gadar movement in Punjab, right, especially those who returned back and those who were affected by it, it inspired a new set of revolutionary movement, though it was quickly put down by the British because they had infiltrated the Gadar movement with informants. But still, it remains a key part of India's revolutionary struggle for freedom. Next, on page 14, the Thatagata Buddha relics and the Pirprahwa relics are in news. Now, this is of great religious and spiritual significance. For the first time ever, the exposition of these relics is being carried out in Ladakh by the government of India. As people of Ladakh continue to demand greater autonomy and constitutional autonomy under 6th schedule, Union Home Minister Amit Shah has reached Ladakh to engage in talks and to try and address these demands. And one of the outreach is to appeal to the Buddhist community. It's a soft power initiative essentially. So the government is carrying out the first such exposition in Ladakh, displaying the sacred Thatagata Buddha relics, which is seen as part of the Pirprahwa relics. So this can be a art and culture or history question. The Pirprahwa relics are considered to be the relics of Lord Gautam Buddha himself, discovered for the first time in 1898 by British archaeologist William Claxton. And in the second excavation that happened in 1970s under KM Srivastava, further artifacts and relics were found. So these relics contain the ash and bone fragments along with other precious artifacts, which reportedly links it with the Sakya clan of the ancient city of Kapilavastu that existed in the Terai belt, which is seen as the very birthplace of Buddhism and Lord Gautam Buddha. So, given its connections to the ancient city of Kapilavastu, which is believed to be present somewhere today on the borders of UP and Nepal, right? So, that's where the Pirprahwa relics were discovered. And the Thatagata Buddha relics is part of it. It holds a lot of religious, sacred, and spiritual significance amongst Buddhists across the world. India has even displayed Pirprahwa relics in other countries as well recently. Recently, we transported Pirprahwa relics to Bhutan. Similar Buddha relics, the Kapilavastu relics, were transported to Sri Lanka a few years ago, where we conducted an exposition to appeal to the Buddhist population in those countries. So this has long been a part of our Buddhist diplomacy. These relics are usually preserved and stored at the National Museum. But once in a while, the government will take the caskets and put it on display in other countries or in key locations where Buddhist population is present, right? Now, coming to the last topic, India's first green methanol plant is coming up in the Kutch region of Gujarat. So there are a lot of points to understand here. It's a very important prelims topic. First, you need to know what is green methanol, what is its use, what is its purpose, and what is so unique about this plant coming up in Kutch. See, the uniqueness is that it is using one of the most invasive plants known to us as a feedstock to produce this fuel. Methanol is used as a fuel in shipping, right? It's a very key propulsion method. It is also known as bunker oil, or it is a replacement for bunker oil, which is fossil fuel based, right? Usually through the process of gasification, coal gasification or gas processing, methanol is extracted and it's used as a replacement for bunker oil, which is crucial for powering cargo vessels. Now, the green version of it would be produced by using cleaner alternatives, by using bio alternatives. Generally, methanol produced in gaseous form, it's produced using fossil fuel sources like coal or gas. Through coal process or gas process, it is produced. So since it contributes to emissions, there is focus on generating or producing green methanol, which is produced from green sources or plant sources essentially. So in India, there is one deadly invasive species, a shrub, which has become like a weed. Please make a note of this name. It's called the Prosopis juliflora. You can see the image over here. I'm sure across India, you would have seen this particular shrub growing everywhere, in every nook and corner of the country. This is actually a Mexican species. From Mexico, it got introduced in India by the British. And you know why they introduced this? It was deliberately introduced. They wanted to beautify Delhi, to increase the green cover of their capital. They brought Prosopis juliflora and introduced it in India, and it was an alien species. And it spread rapidly. It became invasive. It took over ecosystems. It destroyed native variety of plants. So it is a ecological hazard. It has spread from Gujarat to Tamil Nadu. In many parts of the country, this invasive species of shrub can be found. In Gujarat, it was introduced by the forest department itself to arrest the spread of the salt desert. They thought it would help in increasing the green cover, but now it has turned into a invasive species that is spreading rapidly in the Kutch region. In the Gujarat region of Kutch, it's known as Gando Bawal. Vilayati Kikar is the name in North India. Simai Karuvelam in Tamil. So it has different names. The plant has different names across different parts of India. So since it's an invasive weed which has developed in the Kutch region, the same material can be used as a biofeedstock to produce green methanol. So it will help address the ecological concerns posed by the invasive weed species, and it will help produce green methanol, which is a cleaner alternative for shipping fuel. See, India has a very ambitious plan to turn the west ports of India into green ports in the coming years. Because see, the International Maritime Organization has set a goal to achieve net zero emissions in shipping industry by 2050. So India and all the other countries are working with IMO to try and bring down the emissions of the shipping industry and the port operations. India's goal is to turn the western ports from Kandla to Mangalore into green ports of India. So using green methanol as a cleaner alternative would help achieve that objective. But producing green methanol involves a two-step process. First, the green methanol undergoes this complicated synthesization process where the plant material, the feedstock which is brought in, it is basically turned into syngas or synthetic gas. Synthetic gas comprises of hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. Then it is gasified. So first, basically, the material is burnt. Since it is a biomass, it is burnt without oxygen. So there's a combustion process initially. And the combustion without oxygen, it generates the dense energy material which is needed to provide that energy during burning, right? And it breaks down into syngas, which is further synthesized through the second step, thermax, where it is turned into methanol, which can become a fuel for the ships. So it's a complex process, but Indian institutions and companies have started pioneering this method. And it's not just this invasive shrub, even any other biomass can be used. Be it bagases from the sugar industry, or be it cotton biomass left behind from the cotton production. All of it can be used. And the best part is that green methanol will significantly bring down emissions. Studies have shown that green methanol has almost 95% less CO2 emissions and 80% less emissions of nitrogen oxides or NOx. So it's a cleaner, greener alternative which can help push port operations and shipping industry towards cleaner technologies. So on this note, I bring the analysis to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the topics, like the session. If you benefited, please press the like button and share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.